The big value of Globalized core training, like people get so locked into that and then I can feel my abs burn. It's feeling the whole thing connect, because in powerlifting, Olympic lifting, or strongman, it's all about using the whole body as a coordinated unit.
It's time to sit down, keep it real, and cut the bullshit. Welcome to Table Talk. Josh, it's great to have you out here. I got to jump off with what you showed me before we started, which was your nasty pec, because it's also pinned on your Instagram.
Right.
So I don't know where to start with that ugly ass picture on Instagram or how it originally. Let's go with that one, right? So you told me you originally tore it.
Yeah.
Or they originally fixed it.
Yeah. So I've torn it, tore the left one a couple times. So the second time that it was repaired was 2018. And so that was a tear at the myotendinous junction, and they repaired that in about a year after the repair. Functionally, everything was still going okay, but looked like a pimple kind of came up, and then like it opened up and granulation tissue started coming out. And so that was the hole that's on Instagram that looks like a brain with a wire coming out of it.
So the wire worked its way.
Yeah. There was, so I'm not obviously an orthopedic surgeon, so I can't say this confidently, but I feel like there was a lot of wire in there. About 36 inches came out total. Like I collected it over the time that it was coming out. And the doctor that did it was like, But I finally bumped into another doctor that was like, hey, shouldn't be that.
Are they supposed to use a wire?
Well, there's it's like I say wire, it's like fiber wire. So I think it was like made out of like maybe nylon or some sort of polymer fiber, not like copper wire. But I'm not sure though.
I'm not a surgeon either, so I don't want to talk out my ass. But when I had mine done, I think they screwed it back in.
Yeah, I've talked to a couple people that
it sounds like they kind of like used a fish hook, put it around it, and then like wrapped it around.
Yeah, well, funny you say that. The way that he actually explained it to me, because it was a tear at the myotendinous junction, was that he was essentially sewing wet cardboard to wet cardboard and waiting to let it dry.
Yeah,
was the analogy that he gave me.
So how did you originally tear it? If we go way back,
it was just bench press.
Were there like minor tears before?
There was like a partial tear, and then there was a complete tear and a fix, and then a complete tear and a fix. But the complete tear, the second one was there was a lot of scar tissue already there, and then it was at the myotendinous junction, which is also like a hard place to repair.
Yeah. So for those listening, because I had like a bunch of pulls before it fully ruptured. And did you have a history of those beforehand?
Yeah, there was definitely some warning signs. I think one of those like types of things where you probably like you felt a little tweak, you thought that everything was okay, and then 6 to 8 weeks later it wasn't as okay as you thought.
Yeah.
So you didn't let everything,
Did you have that? Because mine always felt like a pop. Like it would pop, and then it's like, I was way younger too. It was like, wow, whatever. I'll skip one day, and then one training day, then the next training day it would hurt a little bit, then it would go away, and you just keep going.
I had maybe like a couple small ones like that, but no, the two that I'm referencing, the big ones, it was more like Velcro ripping or something like that, and it was gone.
Well, what I'm wondering is, because if I could go back, which none of us can, those are all kind of like little warning signs.
Yeah.
And yes, you find ways to train around it and all this other kind of stuff. And after a period of time, I just felt, fuck it, this just comes with the territory, and you find the ways around. Whereas I would have went back and changed the training just a little bit, because maybe not after the first one, and you may have seen this with people that you work with as well. The first ones are the first ones in this. I mean, there's some shit that just is kind of like part of it. But when it's reoccurring, I think we'll start to develop compensation patterns. And then those compensation patterns start leading to other things that are going off. Mm-hmm. And then I like to say, I tore my left pec, which ended up tearing my right pec because of instability. Then this instability from there fucked up my left shoulder, which then like kept circling through over a period of time. And I like to think that, with the experience that we have going through all this, you can see it in other people and boom. Oh yeah. Like, you can stop it right here by doing this.
Right. Yeah. Usually, and like you said, it's easier sometimes from an outside looking in, controlling other people's.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you're going through it the first time, like you said, sometimes you don't notice the warning signs. I think most of the injuries that I've had, and you probably feel the same, you can look back and say, hey, I should have, maybe even that same day working up for it. You're like, hey, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Or
Yeah.
the set right before it, you kind of talk yourself into it and you're like, I'm just, it's in my head.
Tons of times. But
Yeah.
God, I can remember times where it would tweak. And you're like, fuck it, I got to find out for sure. So you'll go up on the next one.
Yeah.
But in full transparency, a lot of times the next one didn't hurt. So I don't know if it was a bad decision. But go ahead.
I would say that was, for my experience, that was actually sort of what I experienced with the quads more recently. That was something that was just like, I had changed my lifestyle quite a bit. I'd moved to Canada. I was on a tractor for like 6 hours and came in and went and worked out, and it felt good. And then kind of talked myself into the next set after that, because I was like, maybe I should shut it down at this one set. Maybe I shouldn't do the last set I'm supposed to do. But with the benches, I had tweaked my right pec maybe 2 years, 3 years before. I tore my left one the first time completely. I probably was shifting a little bit there. So after that last pec tear, then like you said, you realize that you have to adjust things. You just have to do things differently, and you don't get stronger on the sidelines.
What were some of the things that you adjusted? Because there was a time I was dealing with, as I told you before, just the reoccurring ones that would happen. And then my hope was, as long as it doesn't happen 3 weeks out, I'm good, because it's only going to screw me up for 2 weeks, then I'll be fine. But I had to make some changes to my training. It took a couple of years to kind of work them out to where that never happened again. So what were some of the changes that you made?
To be honest, I just started applying the same level of critical thinking to my upper body training that I did to my lower, because I, enjoyed it a lot more. I started incorporating a lot of Hackenschmidt presses, like dead presses from floor position. And I would set it up where it was touching my chest. I would adjust. I had wagon wheels and then a pad underneath me, so it would give me a little bit more range of motion than just stopping my elbows on the floor too. So I had full range of motion, but then I was also setting myself up where it was almost like a technical cue. I could feel if anything was uneven. I had to start from the bottom position. It was a mechanical disadvantage, so if I could start from that position, I knew I was safe through the rest of the movement. And then I could control the eccentric as much as I wanted on the way back down. And if I needed to, I could always bail out. So that psychological confidence of being able to do that made it a lot better for that too. But then also that feedback from when does one side hit the floor, when does the other side hit the floor. You can feel everything brace and lock in before you start to press. So you kind of have that mental checklist. Instead of taking it out of the rack, you can never really get in over your head, right? So I would be able to feel everything lock in, systems check, press, and then I could perform whatever tempo, like I said, on the eccentrics that I wanted. And I could go from that and use that as post-activation potential sometimes to go into like really great range of motion. So I would use some Buffalo bar Larson presses so that it's a really extended range of motion, and use slower tempos on that afterwards. The other thing was just making my upper body much more athletic. I always enjoyed jumps, and I did a lot of stuff that required lower body agility and more lower body athleticism. But when it came to the upper body training, most of it was just training like a meathead and you know, just lifting. And when I began incorporating a lot of throws, that ended up helping the coordination of everything to really produce that power and use everything like a whole unit. A lot of times when I teach a bench press, I think of making it like a throw anyway, so that you have that transfer of power through it. And I guess, for lack of a better word, I wasn't very good at actually throwing things like a shot put style throw or something like that.
You do med ball, like laying on the floor med ball throw, like floor press med ball throws is kind of what I would call it.
Stuff like that. And my father-in-law, he was a throws coach at the University of Saskatchewan, and so he was able to show me quite a few drills. With big guys that are really strong, it's often when you teach them like a shot put or something like that, they can really hurt their elbow or
Yeah,
shoulder
yeah,
or
yeah.
something like that, because they're a lot stronger than
Yeah.
they have to be.
Yeah.
A lot stronger than they have to be to shove that.
Mm-hmm.
So he would have me do some like kneeling drills. So I'd be in like a lunge position with one leg out front, throw it like that, other stuff like that, or even like both legs down, and you can use the hips to throw too, but you can just fall forward on the ground and catch yourself, and other drills like that make it a little safer for big guys to do it.
So this is so interesting to me because what I did was like the total fucking opposite of what you did, which means multiple things can work, right? Is after having all these reoccurring, I called it tearing scar tissue, but pulse, after the surgeries and all the other stuff, is I remember getting with Louis one day and we had this conversation, and his whole thought with this was, let's find a way that you can bench where you use the least amount of pec possible. Right. Which now I went to a thumbless grip to where I could tuck more, move the grip in just a little bit, started with it way more out in front, made the bar path the straightest line ever possible, just to shorten that distance, but to also to bring the elbows up higher from the bottom of the bench, and basically put everything on my front delts and triceps. That way I can't strain what's not working that hard. This, the thought process of all that. And then any movement that would, because I was doing like flies and all kinds of shit to strengthen the adduction.
Right.
Get rid of all those. Don't do anything that worked your pec at all. Because my thought was if I could get a little bit of a pump in there, then there's blood in there. It's going to help it heal. This was just like remove all that shit. Let's just reduce the range of motion. Let's take everything off the pec, then build everything else up. And the issues, they went away. Right? I used the bench shirt too, so there's a caveat to be able to put in there. Very rarely was straight weight ever done. Everything was either with bands or chains, all speed work, just to kind of lessen that impact, that was at the bottom of the lift.
Yeah.
And it could be why my shoulders got fucked up later. But that I think out of all those things, the thing that probably had the biggest impact was eliminating all the flies and shit like that. That was probably putting more stress on it than it should, because instead of using 15-pound dumbbells, I'm using 50s. So it probably is the right way to go if it was loaded to strengthen those end positions. Right. Where I think that's the better way, kind of what you were looking at, is do the bulk of the work, but then strengthen those long end positions. In case anything happens, you're strong. I just fucking avoided those positions at all cost, but fortunately never got caught in one.
Right.
Had I got caught in one, it would not have been good.
I think that's a really smart way to adjust the competition movement, though, in like the way that you were performing that, because that allowed you to still play to your strengths.
Yeah.
For moving it to the close grip. Like I moved my hands in just a little bit, just 2 finger widths from what I had been doing prior to that, and I've just kept it in ever since then. The
thumbless helped moving that too, going to the thumbless, because I could tuck so much harder. I generally don't advise it for people unless they're very experienced lifters, because these idiots will drop it on themselves. But I got to the point where my thumbless grip, I could grip tighter than my full grip.
I feel like it's easier to keep it stacked. Like it feels like it stays stacked better. That's why I use a fat bar a lot too. And it seems like it keeps everything stacked over my elbow and wrist. Feels like it's in a better position. And so, if I'm not doing a competition bench press variation anyway, I might as well use a fat bar too, if is the way I looked at it. So I would make a lot of those same, or I did make a lot of those same considerations too, but I felt like I was, from the developmental side of it, I was trying to make sure I didn't let it happen again. And I was also just trying to get better at using my upper body, because with the throws and stuff, because I think that some of the limiting factor was probably just general athleticism for my upper body. Like I went into powerlifting relatively young. I wasn't like one of those kids that played football all through high school.
Started lifting when you were 6. I mean, we'll get into that.
Yeah. And so, now as a coach, I preach against over specification, and, focusing on general development. But ironically, I sort of focused like maybe a little too hard on general development.
Yeah.
Didn't go and, I played baseball, I played basketball and football a little bit, but like I didn't push those that hard. And
Well, what I wonder, because I did my first meet when it was before I could drive. I think I was 13. And what I wonder, because you started very young too, is I don't think it's a bad thing per se, but I think theoretically we only have so many competitive years in us.
mm-hmm.
And had I started 5 years later, that would have perhaps added 5 more years on the back end, right? And then basically right before you're done, like say 2 or 3 years before you're done, are obviously your strongest years, right? The last few years, maybe you're just hanging on, right? But what if you had 5 more years at that point and they were kind of sacrificed because you started too young?
Right.
I know with the anabolics, this is totally true. Like if somebody starts the anabolics way too soon, it's going to inhibit what their big outcome is.
Yeah, like what their cap is. I feel like, because it's kind of like hitting the nitrous in a car, I think, when you're thinking about that. But or like when we're talking about anabolics for like a second there, I think that's kind of like hitting the nitrous on a car. Like if the chassis is not ready for that, then if you hit the nitrous on a VW Bug, it's going to burn out pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, if your car's not tuned,
so, yeah, like I've got a 21-year-old now. He'll probably maybe will squat 500 kilos this year, drug free. And that's been one of the things I've really hammered into him over the last couple of years is, you've got some incredible potential. So don't get tempted by this ACE card too soon, because you're still adding over 150 pounds a year to your total. Like there's no reason to do that.
See, that's what's crazy to me is I see the same thing. I'll see people that are adding 100, 150 pounds to their total every year.
Yeah. And
then they want to go on. I'm like, you're already making better gains than a lot of people who are on.
Yeah.
Like, what you think it's going to go to 300? It's maybe it will for the first year.
For the first year or two.
But then it will tap back down. But you're already making steroid-like gains.
Mm-hmm.
Just keep rolling with that until it doesn't work anymore. And then when it does, I like your thoughts on this too. When it doesn't work anymore, before you jump on, start playing around with sleep, nutrition, weight classes. Start playing around with the other variables, and because they'll help increase. Because you're going to have to anyhow at some point.
Right.
So you can go on and use that as the card, and then get 2 or 3 more years, and then it's going to slow down again because it doesn't work. I mean, we'd all be lifting thousands of pounds on all lift if it worked that way. At some point, you're going to have to figure that out again because it's not going to work. And you're going to be like, fuck, I'm taking tons of shit. Nothing's working. Maybe I need to look at what I'm eating.
Yep. Exactly. It's all like pouring into one cup. So if you need to pour the things in that matter the most first. And the other thing is, in college, they talked about testing properly, like just any type of like structure that you're doing to look at different metrics. And you always want to make sure that the next test doesn't cloud your understanding of the previous tests.
So not throwing too many things all in at one time.
Right. So if and if you throw that in, you don't really know what works, right? Because you're playing everything else on easy mode. And so then later when you try to figure it out, it's a little bit harder. If you try to milk everything you can out of everything, I feel like it's a win-win all around, because you understand what to do to get more out of these other tools, to get more out of stuff when you have to throw that in.
That can be a little tricky though, because that's where you have the people that program hop, right? They'll go from one thing to the next thing. And I understand why people do that. I don't like it, but because they change all these variables, but on the other end, they don't know what's not working out of all the variables that they're using. You see what I'm saying? Right. So if you're on said program, there's multiple pillars to that program, and maybe only one of them might be off, but because of that, there's no progress. So they'll change everything instead of trying to figure out what the one variable off is. So as a coach, you got a different view on that. So how do you help figure out which one of those variables to look at first?
Right. I think that goes back to like everybody tends to have like a more of the short-term vision versus thinking of it like multi-year periodization, like seeing where they're going with it. Because if they're too focused on like their short-term, like how much did I go up maybe from this meet to this meet, if they're doing 2 or 3 meets in the same year, and it's like, well, you're pissed that you only put 20 pounds on your total from this meet to this meet, but like every year you're putting 150 pounds on your total still. So like, things are coming together long term. So if you have like that young guy I was talking about earlier, I've been working with him for quite a few years, and so we could have chased hitting 600 pounds a little sooner, but we probably wouldn't be chasing 1,100 pounds now. And just thinking about how everything, you're talking about changing everything because something doesn't fit into that one pillar, then if you have a long-term goal and you know how the block that you're currently in builds towards that long-term goal, then you know how to value what you just did a little bit more, even if it doesn't.
It's good in theory.
Yeah.
And
it's hard to say.
Well, I preach the shit out of it. And if I look back through my own competitive career, I can say, say phase 1 was, I just wanted to be able to lift in the nationals, and I knew that wasn't going to happen right away.
Right.
I'm a fucking teenager. Right. But I know what that total is. And it was an elite total at the time. And I'm like, okay, this is going to take longer than I think. I figure I could probably do it in 4 years, but it's probably going to be 6. I did realize really young, because I competed a lot, that not every meet is 9 for 9. Out of 6 meets, maybe 2 go the way that you really want them, if that. You want them to. So I'm like, okay, if it's going to take 4 years, half those meets are going to not go well. So there's another 2. But then when you get to that first benchmark, things get weird, because it's like, now what, right? Then it becomes everything you want now. That timeline gets shortened because you're there. You just don't want to place in the bottom half. You don't want to be last.
Right.
But you're not good enough to be first. But that instead of that 4-year window now you're looking at like 2 with drugs, maybe with a lot of drugs more. And then I had my first major injury, that required surgery. And that was about the same time when I went to Westside. And then that was, a lot of things changed. It was kind of the opposite of what we're talking about, but a lot of things changed. And I remember Louis laying out basically 3 years. Here's where we want to be in 3 years. I'm like, fucking 3 years. Like, this might be my last year. I thought I was done. I'm like, every year from this year forward could be my last. So fuck it. I'm going, it's a dangerous place to be, by the way. I'm going as hard as I can, but it ended up being another like quadrennial, long-term thinking. My greatest gains were always made when I had the long-term thinking, but I didn't really know that's what I was doing. When I got caught in those in-between times, which I think we all go through, and because strength isn't linear. It's just like you train that there's like 150 pounds on your total, like 1 meet, like what the fuck? And you think it all happened over this 16-week period, or better drugs, better training, whatever. But the foundation for it was laid earlier, right? So it's hard trying to explain this to athletes, and it sounds like you've successfully done that because of that. Because you can go to this was another big thing for me, is I went to a meet, and I remember squatting 870, and it took like an hour and a half to stand up with. No form breakdown. Everything was locked in. It was just hard as fuck. And it was one of the most, I don't know if the word's depressing, frustrating drives home I ever had. And with Louis I'd go to the meets with him. Driving back, I didn't say anything for like an hour, because all I'm trying to do is to figure out what the fuck. Like, I gotta get stronger. It's easier to fix technique. Like if something fell out of the groove, or you can just fix it, then it will be there. But when everything was there and it was hard as fuck, like, oh, fuck. Like, what do we do?
Because it feels like what you were doing didn't work.
Yeah. And fortunately for us, I think chains or something came into the equation. Some stimulus changed. And then the next meet I squatted 900, and it was easy as hell. And I remember driving back and having the same conversation with Louis, like, what the fuck, what are we going to do? And all he did is he looked at me and said, the best course of action is to do exactly what you just did and get the number that you should have got, which say it would have been 940, which was in my head. It was like, I don't have to do more. I just have to repeat kind of the same thing I just did and display the strength that I had, but didn't show that day. And that plays back in to the, because that was a big pivot for me, because normally it would be, you would hit something like that. Then when you go to put your training down for that next block or next phase, you're not using the 900. You're using what you could have done that day. Like I smoked that shit. I know for a fact I could have squatted at least, I would say 950, but say everybody else would agree 930. So what number do you think I'm going to base the training on? The 900 or the 930?
930.
Everybody's going to go on the 930, right? But that was that pivot for me to be like,
should go do the 900.
Yeah, because that whole training cycle that next time around was less taxing, easier to recover from, not really lifting anything I haven't lifted before, still training hard, but being able to go in even healthier, which at a certain point, how healthy you go in determines your performance.
Yeah.
Not how strong you are.
I think that's something that a lot of people have noticed with like applying the max effort work, especially people that are good at turning it all the way on, like that when they go all out, it is actually all out. I think that realizing that maybe like having some sort of auto regulation there, like RPE 8, RPE 9, like not truly like go until you miss a lift, not go until it looks like shit. You go till it's the most that you can do perfect type of thing, and keeping decent bar speed with it a lot of times, because some people have the technical capability to push as hard as they can and on a lift. So if you're really, really good at displaying strength and you've got a high level of mechanical efficiency and you've got the psychological profile to really push yourself really hard, then that 1 rep max is a lot more taxing on everything than for somebody that is still mastering a movement, or somebody that just can't even flip the switch like that too.
One thing that just came to my mind as you were saying that is I was at Westside for I think 14 years. And so the max effort was the max effort, and the movement changed and varied based upon how we felt. I can go into all kinds of details about that. But one thing that you just made me realize is we would never use 5s or 2s ever, right? If somebody tried to put a 5 on a max effort lift, it's like, get the fuck out of here. It's either a dime or you're done. But think about what that would do, right? Because if you did a lift and it was really hard, you're like 20 pounds more. There's no fucking way. 10 pounds, yeah, maybe. But since the minimum was that 20 pounds, I'm done. So now it might have been 96% instead of 98%. So a little bit less because you knew you weren't going to make the next jump.
Right.
There were sometimes it was plate, quarter, plate, quarter, plate, quarter. If you can't make the fucking from the quarter to the plate, you're done.
You're done. Yeah.
Well, yeah. See what?
So you've got a little in the tank.
Yeah.
Unless you overshoot, you've saved just a little bit in the tank.
Yes.
And I know you said like that doubles, triples, 5s, stuff like that was like a no-go, but like with some, sometimes using that as a top set though, using the same sort of concept of that, like 1 rep in leaving a rep in the tank for somebody that can, really flip the switch is probably about the same stimulus as going to a rep max for somebody.
Well, the way I would basically do it is I'm working up in that movement. After the first 3 warm-up sets, if it's really jacked up, then I'm doing something else. But if it's not, then in my head, it's triple, 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 triple. You keep going for triples, and you get to a certain point, 70, 80%, where my best is not going to happen, but I might be able to get my best triple. Right? So then you're not shooting for your best because you already know on that day it's not in the cards. So there was that pivot. This is just going to be a triple. I mean, if it was really bad, it was something else. If it was iffy, then maybe fuck it. I'm just going to do like 4 or 5 and get a PR for 4 or 5. But that single only happened if you knew there's a potential here to actually get that. Right. Otherwise, it would stay double, triple, so you don't end up going that way anyhow. Are you feeling like you're not the man you're supposed to be? Low confidence, negative thoughts polluting your brain. That's me. I get it. I've been dealing with messed up hormones most of my life. A couple years I hooked up with Merrick Health, and it was one of the best things that I ever did. They're a health optimization platform that does advanced lab works and goes deeper than probably what you've ever seen before. What you'll get with Merrick Health is they have guided optimization and the self-service diagnosis. I personally have been using the guided optimization for the whole time I've been with him. Dry is my health coach. He does an amazing job. The second route that they have is the self-service diagnostics. This is just a DIY with your own health journey. You just head over to Merrick Health, pick the panel, and they'll send you the report. You just kind of go from there. Either way, I highly recommend them, and you can get 10% off right now. Just head over to merrickhealth.com and use the code TABLETALK at checkout.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, so there's a lot of auto regulation kind of built in, to the whole thing.
I think that comes down to like there's a lot of refinement in how well people apply that over the years too. Like we were talking about, sometimes knowing stuff's coming, or just that all plays in together to being able to listen to what's going on in your body and communicate with the people around you, take feedback from people, see,
Well, that's the trick. I mean, that's what you got to navigate as a coach is you need to see that in who you're working with, but then you also need to be able to teach them the skill of doing that. Mm-hmm. And since you were in the trenches for so long, that's the tricky part, because there's some times where you're just being a puss because you're being a puss, and you just need to, push through it.
Yeah.
There's other times to where you push through it and it's not the right decision, and you don't, as people who help other people, you don't know it because you're not in their body.
Right.
They have to make that decision, because if they backed off every time they didn't feel like they could go up, they're never going to progress. That's
a big learning curve for coaches as well. Like you said, working with other people, and when you're working with different populations, being able to communicate with people and learn your athletes. You have to know your athletes well enough to know, like, when do you push them, when do you pull back, because it's the same thing as for yourself. There's some athletes that'll kill themselves, and then if you're working with regular people a little bit more too, then usually you have to be on them a little bit more.
With the personality types
too.
There's been way more than several lifters that I've trained with or helped that you would never think they are mentally into it. They're just like chill all the fucking time, but they are. They just don't outwardly display it the way somebody else would. Where in contrast to that, you can have somebody else that outwardly displays like a maniac, but has so much doubt and fear that what they're showing isn't even true.
Yeah.
It's fake. They're just doing all that to try to make themselves think that they can, right? To where they'd be way better off if they just chilled out, and
yeah, I've been guilty of that before.
Yeah.
I've been guilty of that before of if there was something that I did feel like, a little bit of doubt about, that was the thing, and sometimes it works. Sometimes it works to get amped up like that and talk yourself into it. Sometimes, sometimes it's better though. I think it's actually always better if you can get to that place of that calm confidence.
Confidence is what it is, because I don't care who it is. If they tell me otherwise, they're fucking lying. Everybody with a maximum weight that they never lifted before has doubt. Everybody, right? It's just how you deal with it, and how you create more confidence than doubt. I mean, that's what it ends up being. And however you can get the highest level of confidence and arousal with the least physical stimulus is going to always be the best option. But I was one of them idiots too that would get all ramped up, whap his head on the bar, do whatever it needed to do until I figured it worked. Until I figured out how much better it would work if I don't do that, but inside can still have that same rage and aggression.
The best meet that I ever had, the thing that I told myself before I set up for every set, was just another day at the office, was what I said every time to myself, because it was just that grounding thing. Because I don't normally have a problem. Like sometimes I would get amped up because it felt good, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I would get amped up because I was trying to mask being a little bit, you know, doubtful of whatever the lift was. But that training cycle that I just really decided that's the way I'm going to approach it, that was definitely the most successful training block. And I felt like I recovered better the whole time too. I don't think people really realize how much it impacts their recovery when they're,
Oh yeah.
you know, when they're mobilizing everything. You know, it's the sympathetic parasympathetic shift. You're shifting to mobilize all resources. You're going into that fight or flight because you're scared of it, and I mean, that goes anyway. But you know, Ed Cohn, I think, said to somebody coming off the platform when they said, "How close was I to that?" He said, about one scream away, I think is the quote that I remember. And so I tried to think about that a lot too.
I wonder if, I mean, personality type definitely plays into this, that you have to experience the over arousal to know where you're supposed to be. Because I can remember, shit, I still do this now, that I'll get over aroused, right? So just pissed because I like it. Pissed, you take a lot of shit off, I take a lot of shit out in the weight room. So you get to that point, but sometimes I go a little too far, and I know it. It's like, okay, stop. You know, bring it down. Yes. So it's like I go here, and it's like, okay, click, here.
Yeah.
Right, and you bring it back. I don't know if you can develop that unless you've gone too far.
Yeah, and I kind of think that's like one of those natural, like universal things. Like everything kind of ebbs and flows, right? Like it's like Goldilocks. You have something that's a little too hot, you have something that's a little too cold, and then you find the thing that's right in the middle. And then sometimes what's right changes over time or even day to day. But you know, just I think everybody, if they don't have to overcorrect and, you know, adjust for things, then I think they're probably not aiming for things very high or going after things that they are super passionate about, you know? Like,
yeah,
'cause it's really easy to get caught up if you're passionate about something.
Oh, most definitely. No, most definitely.
So
right, and that will drive a lot. So going back to this, when you started at like 6, like how does that happen?
You know, I really just started, there was a bodybuilding magazine at Food Lion that was the grocery store right up from my house, and I would go look at the magazines while Mom grocery shopped, and one day I wanted that magazine, and I had been trying to like do push-ups and stuff at home, and you know, well, I was doing push-ups and stuff at home, and I just really wanted to do that, and it made me feel better immediately. I didn't know it until much later, but I'm like on the autistic spectrum a bit, and so that extra sensory input was really helpful for me. So I didn't understand why I could talk to people better and just felt more relaxed and everything after I lifted, but it would be just a complete mood shift. So I would, even before school, I would wake up and I would do dumbbell flies and push-ups and squats and lunges and stuff like that, and I would go to school and feel a whole lot better and happier. And
what was the reason? Were you in other sports?
I wasn't in. I played pee-wee, like soccer and t-ball and stuff like that when I was, you know, but I didn't actually have any interest in it around the 5, 6, 7-year-old range, starting kindergarten. I just saw this magazine, was interested in it, and I just immediately felt like I felt better after it, and so I just immediately started doing it frequently. And then over the years, I was like, you know, every little boy looks at Arnold and it's like, I want to look like that eventually.
Well, when you say you felt better, like what was the baseline before doing it?
It's hard to say like a 5 or 6 year old was depressed or something like that, but like I wasn't super stoked to go do things. I didn't have, you know, a lot of social skills, kind of stuff like that. And it was a lot easier for me to talk to my other classmates and go do whatever else after I lifted. So, I mean, I felt, you know, I hate to say the word like, I don't know. I just felt like I could communicate with everybody a lot better after, and was a lot more relaxed. And I don't know, I feel just at peace after I lift. So I've always done that. My grandma gave me some pulleys and some rope, and I set some stuff up with cinder blocks in her backyard too, and all that kind of stuff. But I didn't really have a sport that I was training for. I just did it every day.
Yeah.
So
For like vanity?
no. Well, I will admit, you know, thinking back on it, because I think like body dysmorphia is something people should probably talk about a little bit, because I do actually remember being like 8 or 9 years old, and like the litmus test that I had was, is my chest bigger than my stomach? And as long as my chest was bigger than my stomach, I felt like I was like kind of muscular.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
So yeah, as a kid, like I guess there was a little bit of that. Maybe that's a little more mindful of that than a kid should be, but not necessarily. No, I just really liked it. I had a couple years where I like had a little liaison from it, because I had done all the stuff that I could do at home for several years and felt kind of bored with it. And then there was like a 2-year gap before the local gym would allow people to join that gym, you know, like 12 years old for liability reasons. But then it kind of, I was actually getting a little fluffy in that time. So my mom got me a gym membership that year, and I was like, maybe this will get him interested in that again.
So how did you get into powerlifting so young?
There was a group of powerlifters at the gym, and to be honest, they were just the ones that were the nicest and the most willing to help me out. They, you know, they saw a kid. I also really enjoyed lifting super heavy relative to what I could lift from the get-go. So I would go in and quite often get stapled on something, and usually the powerlifters were the ones that would go pull me out of the hole on the squat or whatever else kind of situation I'd gotten myself into.
How old were these guys?
Most of them were in their 30s. A couple of them were in their 40s. And so they just kind of saw this like 12-year-old about to kill himself. So they let me, well, first they started helping me, and then I was like, well, I guess these guys want to be my friends. So I started following them around and came into the gym the same times that they did. And so after a while, they had me start training with them and stuff like that. So there was a group that trained, and I mean, they rotated, they all did the same movements. You know, everybody knew what place they were in. You know, if the lifter was on the bench, there was a guy to each side and a guy behind, and, you know, they rotated, whoever was on the sides loaded the weight, and you knew what spot you were in. And so it was a very good organized training group to start with. And I wouldn't say that they let me like initially, you know, just jump right in. I had to kind of tag along until I proved myself as like being serious enough to take up their training time entirely, you know. But
so what did that look, I'm going to go somewhere with it. What did that look like? Like how long did the whole tagging along thing?
Pretty much till they realized they weren't going to get rid of me, I think, honestly. About a year or so, I tagged along and was just kind of, it was funny. At one point, I think that they actually, I don't know if it was because of work or they were trying to get away from me, but their schedule changed. So I had to ask the front desk lady, I was like, hey, when are these guys coming into the gym? And
they were ditching you, man.
So that, yeah, maybe. And so then I came in and they were like, well, hell, we're not going to get rid of him, so might as well let him train with us, I guess. So they started letting me train with them, taking me to meets with them. And yeah, I guess that was 2005. I was still semi-tagging along with them when I did my first meet. And then by 2006, I was training with them.
So while you were in there during that time training, because there's other people that are in there training too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And they're not reaching out to them.
No.
Right. So while you're over in your corner doing your thing,
mm-hmm.
you know, what was your thing?
I was just literally just lifting weights, just whatever I could find in the back of Muscle and Fitness. There was a bodybuilder that came in and did the same circuit every time of leg raises, dips, and pull-ups. So I always started off with a little warm-up of that, and then went into whatever the really heavy movement was for the day, whether it was a bench or decline bench or a squat or deadlift. So I was kind of already doing those movements because I had just sort of found that was what was probably going to work the best when I was reading, and I was going really hard on it. And like I said, they were the ones that let me tag along. So I wouldn't really say that they reached out to me. I would say more that I would go find them. Like they would literally just see me like because I had no fear on bench or something like that. I would just take the weight out, and I, as a kid, literally thought, well, there's enough people in here. Nobody's going to let me die. So I just, boom, and Buddy or Charlie would be the ones that would come running over to pull the weight off. So yeah,
I would assume because powerlifting crews back then are different than powerlifting crews are now.
yeah.
Right. So powerlifting crews back then weren't exactly looking for people.
No, they weren't
You know,
recruiting.
they weren't actively recruiting, right? But they would notice if somebody was consistent, working hard. Consistency is the biggest one. Like, are they showing up all the time?
Yeah.
You know, and are they working hard? And then over a period of time, you know, then said person they need a spot or some shit. You know, so like, hey, can you come over and watch this side? And then it's like grooming.
Yeah.
Right. So they're like slowly kind of grooming, but they're not grooming everybody that's in there, but they're grooming the people that have the attributes of always being there.
Yeah.
You know, and working hard.
I made light of it, but yeah, I mean, I didn't miss sessions. I was even at 13 years old, I was the kid that was like calling the gym, like, hey, you guys open on Christmas Eve? Like, when are you guys, you know, like, and, you know, I was calling those guys like, hey, are you going to be there if I'm going to be squatting? You know, and, you know, so I don't think there was ever any doubt that I would be a consistent training partner. So I do think that was probably the biggest thing. And, you know, even today, like when we pull people in, like for the training group in North Carolina or anywhere else, it's like, that's the biggest thing is it's not how much weight they can lift on the bar, aside from, you know, being competent to, you know, do things.
Yeah.
It's, are they going to be there? Are they going to, you know, or can we trust them to load the weights evenly? Are they going to be in there halfway paying attention and get people hurt? You know, that kind of stuff. Like,
I think it comes down to, do they want to be there?
Right. Are they going to, yeah, exactly. Because if you want to be there, a lot of other stuff falls in place.
Yeah.
You know, if you want to be there, you don't, you know, there's a lot of things you just don't do. And there's a lot of things that you do. So, yeah, I think that was, I made light of it, but that was definitely probably the biggest thing, was that I very clearly wanted to be a part of a group like that. And I wanted to train hard.
How did this lead to your first meet?
They were all doing the meet, so I signed up for it too. And so then they did a lot of AAU meets initially. And then over the years, Buddy Nichols was the main guy that was kind of the Yoda of the group. He was a biochemical engineer too, so he could read a lot of the literature and stuff. And, you know, back then strength coaches were few and far between too in 2005. I mean, especially in the middle of North Carolina, not super close to a university or something like that. So Buddy could read the literature that came out. He was very smart. He could look at the, you know, the real world stuff. I know he always read your training log, and I know on Fridays a lot of times he would be making jokes about whatever funny shit you had said in the training log that week. And so, you know, he blended a lot of those kind of real world and being able to read the literature and stuff too. So
how'd that first meet go?
Oh man, I was tiny. I think I was in the 123 or 132 weight class. I can't remember. I squatted 185. So I was not a strong kid from the get-go too. That should be, even though I was training from 6 years old on, like I often think, like, I wonder how weak and unathletic I would have been if I would have just not been interested in this. Because I mean, I've been training, I mean, my whole life. And, you know, I remember in high school, actually, there was a guy that was, he ended up going D1 for football. But one of my friends came to lift with me in high school, and he'd never deadlifted before. They didn't let them deadlift in the high school weight room there. Maybe it was middle school. Might have still been in middle school. At any rate, he came to lift with me, and they hadn't let him deadlift yet at whatever phase of lifting they were at the school. I showed him how to deadlift, and he deadlifted 545, and I was like, why the fuck am I doing this? It's just like, been doing this forever.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
And yeah, at the time, that was more than I deadlifted by a good bit in high school, you know, or at that point.
I've seen people like that. We've all.
Yeah. But.
So after that first meet, what about it? Was there anything at that first meet that made you want to stick with it, or did you stick with it just because the camaraderie of the people you were training with?
It was entirely the people. I'd never been to a sport, you know, like I said, I wasn't super into basketball and football and the other stuff that I played and tried out and stuff. I did it, you know, because it was, you know, some stuff to do as a kid and experience, but like it was it wasn't the same, like the level, cheering for the same people that you're competing against in a lot of cases. And, I know that's not like that if, it's not like that all the time at every single meet for every single record or everything. But most of the time, even at really high levels, you're stoked to see somebody beat something or just to lift a big weight. And that that genuine excitement for what the sport was something that like I felt like was just like really present in almost everybody in the sport. You know what I mean by that? Like it was, sometimes I feel like in the other sports, like competition is a big part of powerlifting too, but in a lot of other sports, it was just more about that, like winning the game, and it's about doing great and doing great things too. But what pulls you in is that like that sense of belonging when you are there and you're like, okay, well, this is cool. I fit in here, So
as a kid, it was filling your need for community.
Yeah.
Significance.
Yeah. I think that was the community I felt the most a part of, the fastest and the most naturally, I guess you should say.
So at what point did you decide that you wanted to make your college around this?
Actually, sophomore year of college. It wasn't what I went.
What did you go in for?
So initially, I was a pretty big nerd, so I was going for genetics initially. Well, I was going for biology with the intentions of going with a focus in virology or genetics long term. What changed that was I had it was a biotech seminar there. It was like it was like a class, but they called it a seminar because it was like structured to expose you to like a more higher level class while you were still an undergrad. And the professor for that gave us some really good reality checks about what it meant to go into science and to be a scientist. And he was like, if 12-hour days every day aren't your thing, and if you don't want to be more importantly than that, if you don't want to be in a lab for 12 hours a day every day for months on end, sometimes probably not your thing. He gave us a reality check, about like, he's missed birthdays, Christmases, stuff like that with, family and stuff. And then he was like, so, make sure that's what you want to do. And he was like, and also, by the way, I have a PhD and I won't be out of debt till I'm like 65. So,
yeah.
So I started thinking about all these different things. The debt thing was actually the lowest consideration on it because it was just because this is not necessarily this is something you pick for passion too,
Yeah. But those same statements could be said for any job.
As I was saying, yeah. So it's quite ironic because we want to be at the gym a lot of times on Christmas, sometimes anyway, or sometimes we miss, and when we're training for a meet, and you're all in on an athletic endeavor. When you're all in on an athletic endeavor, you miss all kinds of other things. You make lots of other sacrifices too. But I guess it came down to whether or not those things were worth it for what you were getting out of it, whether or not it was fulfilling enough.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, I really love science, and I really thought that would be cool too, to be in a lab like that. But that wasn't where I wanted to spend my 20s, 30s, and 40s. It may be probably not virology or genetics at this point in my life with the path I've already went down, but I may want to go back and be in a lab for exercise sport science related stuff in my 50s or 60s, but that would be after having plenty of years outside of the lab and being able to do other stuff. So that's what put me down this path, was to, I didn't want to do that anymore. And I thought, well, what do I really just want to do? And before I just try to make a job or find a job to just make money, I'll just see if I can make a living doing what I want first.
So when you went down that educational path, your college courses are now beginning to shift more kind of around training. I don't want to say around training because I went through a lot of the same courses. It's really not, it's just how the body reacts to stimulus.
Right.
But for me, it was weird because the shit that they were saying when they would talk about training was so fucked up that it didn't click.
Yeah.
Was it kind of the same?
There was one professor that I remember who like just really without being like overly critical, just kind of over focused on like aerobic stuff, didn't really acknowledge some of the other benefits. You know, it was all about like heart health type of thing. And it was like, well, that's very important too. But, you know, also being able to stand up a certain number of times in a minute is the most correlated thing to maintaining your independence when you get old. So, you know, you should probably get strong enough that you can still squat. Even once you start getting weaker, you need that residual strength to still do a bunch of, you know, so it's just like, well, or, you know, women with bone density, you know, lots of things. But she wasn't super stoked on that. But actually the strength training theory class, Alan Aguilar, I may have annoyed him the first part of it because I was a bit of a nerd. And like you said, we would notice stuff didn't really click. And I've never in any class that I've been in really had much of an ability to keep my mouth shut with stuff like that. So I was always that nerdy guy that was like, hey, I know this says 98, but like, I think there was a typo here. Like that kind of asshole. So I was kind of like that for like the first half of the semester, respectfully in emails, of course, not like, I think a couple times, the first couple lectures, I was like, hey, I actually have some information that's a little, but you know, I was emailing him, and a lot of times when people are in positions of authority like that, they're kind of like, dude, this is my class. But he wasn't. He would always have a conversation with me, and I always really respected him for that because he was super smart. He was an incredible professor, and there was a lot of stuff he knew a lot more about than I did.
Yeah.
About actually most things related to exercise and sports science, except for stuff directly related to the weight room, you know? But it was really cool in that strength training theory class. He actually let me teach the last portion of it in class, like a couple of the lectures, so I could put that on my resume as a project. And then he let me teach the practical part of that down in the women's basketball weight room. And that's where I met one of my college mentors, Jason, too. So yeah, no, I totally agree that a lot of that information, but I had to say that as a cat, you know, because I will say that I think the UNC Exercise Sports Science program had some really super open-minded people that made it really phenomenal if you ended up in their classes with it. He was super open to giving people the right experiential education. Claudio Battaglini was really incredible for physiology too, and Hackney was incredible for physiology. And so those guys, those were really, really beneficial experiences. Like, you know, there's a couple of, you know, things that I feel like were, I guess it's, coaching is all about bridging the gap between the science and the practical application of it. And so I feel like there's a lot of people there that did a really good job of preparing people to bridge that gap.
So you were still competing during this time, right? And more on an uprise as a lifter. So if we were to prioritize, you know, your classroom, because you just said you were a nerd, you know, with the meathead, you know, which one would have been ranked higher?
I would say that was the point where I decided there wasn't a distinction and that I was going to try to use, even though like the classes didn't entirely overlap to what I needed, there were semesters that I chose my courses a little bit based off what I felt like I needed to know next for myself. You know, if there was a little bit of fluidity in which one you could choose first or whatever, or if there was a little bit of, you know, flexibility and what you could choose, like, you know, some of the classes that were not electives, but, you know, it was like within the exercise sports science pool. I definitely made sure I pulled in the things that I needed. So I started thinking of education at that point a lot as a developmental thing for my own athletics as well, just with the intention of eventually helping the same sort of populations that I was kind of putting myself in anyway.
I was choosing all my classes 100%.
Yeah, it was
based upon when I trained. Like I can't take this class because I trained then, so I got to take this other one.
Yeah, I did that too. There was actually a beginning swimming class that I pretended not to be able to swim because I had a meet that semester, so I didn't let him know that I could swim at all until about halfway through the semester. I was like blowing, you know, like they have you blow bubbles. And
we live in some crazy times right now where there's not a day that I don't go on the internet and I see some BS crap about this research study or this research study. This isn't new. I've been in this industry for 4 decades. One thing that's helped me is 8 years ago, the mass research review started, and became a godsend. The mass research team are professional researchers that are also meatheads. So they've done this great job of being able to take all these topics and put them into this research review that I get every month. I'm excited to partner with them. I spoke with Eric Helms about this on the podcast. It's simple, it's easy. They're offering a 20% discount to all podcast listeners. The code is elitefts20. When you join, you get the research review, which is going to be sent to you every single month. It has 7 to 9 articles in there. The archive, which is 1,500 articles, thousands of videos. Just head over to massresearchreview.com and use the code elitefts20. The link will be in the description.
Stuff. And so I'm like over the side, and I've been swimming since I was a little kid.
Yeah.
And about halfway through the semester, we were playing like water polo, but like on the short or on the shallow side. And I like dived and like swam for it because I got competitive, and he started making me swim laps the rest of the semester. But it was okay because I made it through the important part of meet.
Yeah.
Until then.
What did you think you were going to end up doing when you graduated?
At that point, I wasn't 100% sure if I wanted to go into collegiate strength and conditioning or if I wanted to try to go private with it. Initially, I went after college. I was still working with the women's basketball team and men's lacrosse team, and they called it a strength and conditioning manager of strength and conditioning position, not like manager above the coaches, but kind of like the they have like a manager for the team. They just kind of created one for strength and conditioning, so I could work underneath the coaches there. So me and Jason did that for 6 to 8 months after I graduated too, but I'd already started working at a gym called Iron Pit over in Cary. There were some really strong powerlifters over there. There was a couple guys that were from the CFL that were over there. And then a lot of kids from Green Hope High School, which was a relatively well-off high school in that area. And so Iron Pit pretty much served as their like private strength and conditioning clinic over there too, which was an incredible turnaround for Green Hope after they invested in proper strength and conditioning. It was an incredible case study for what good strength and conditioning can do. They went from either not winning a game that season or only winning like 1 or 2 the previous season to being champs in their conference that like 1 or 2 seasons later. And these were all kids that weren't super athletic out of the gate, just like initial raw talent, but just the culture of all of their parents that were investing in this too. Like all of their parents had given them very good work ethics. They were all very smart kids that worked really, really hard, and they found themselves with the right strength coaches, invested in it, and it made a big, big difference.
Yes. Not only are they stronger, but their confidence goes way up as well.
Right.
Yeah. Which pays dividends.
Movement IQ, football IQ, everything,
So what did you end up doing after you graduated then?
I was working at Iron Pit as a strength conditioning coach. I worked there for a while.
Now, how much of that was the athletes and how much was like just Gen Pop?
Most of it was, I would say 85% athletes there. They had it set up. It was pretty much ran like a collegiate weight room. So you'd have people coming in groups, and you just would sign up for the hour that you were coming in. And so you ended up being in a training group. And so it helped with the psychological component too. Like even like the quote unquote Gen Pop regular people that were coming in, it was really beneficial for them, especially the people that had never been a part of a team environment like that, because they found the pace of training. They sort of saw how other people approach or carry themselves and attack the set and stuff like that you don't get if you come to one-on-one personal training sometimes, but also things that you still got the attention that sometimes I think is skipped over in some of the like group training that's gotten popular, where they pack a bunch of people in, but they don't really, watch them. They put it on the board and they're like, here you go. So it was a really good environment for everybody there.
So how did you manage your own training while doing that?
That was actually pretty easy over there because some of the guys that I trained at the time, it was, I actually worked out with a couple of them too, some of the powerlifters. And so, I mean, I was already right there, and, it was really good. And I think anytime that you have a crew of people that are showing up consistently and you can build your schedule for your training around that so that you know what's coming, I think it's okay. I think where it gets really, where things start getting haphazard as a coach is when you're trying to fit your training in around people and your schedule is like changing a lot. So that would be like more like a couple years later when I was at Ultimate Athletics in Granite Falls, when I was back in North Carolina, when I was back in Lenore, then I would be working with, more people for one-on-ones and stuff like that too. Sometimes the schedule would change day to day, and, people are texting you for reservations for a session, and, maybe they cancel, maybe they reschedule, and you're trying to find out where to slide your stuff into these little gaps. At Iron Pit, it was really pretty consistent. I had the same sessions, the same times on the same days. So
now at this point, where was your powerlifting career at?
At that point, I had squatted 765 right as I graduated college, raw. I think I actually might have I squatted 800 that summer after graduating college. That was 800 raw, walked out, and USPA meet. I had my ankle reconstructed in high school, so people, like to talk if you can't walk one out. So I walked one 800-pound squat out, and then I said after that I'll never walk out a heavy squat again, probably for a raw squat. I think 800 is okay, and I'll do. But I hit 832. I think about a year later.
And at that point, because now you're separated from that original crew with the training, so I assume you're playing around with different training methodologies and programming, and you're being inundated because you have all this stuff in college, which is, let's just say it's base, like it's just base knowledge on how you adapt, right? But then there's all the other stuff that's coming in. Meanwhile, you have to put it all together, for a meet. So you're going to experiment a lot. You're going to change a lot. Dare I say, program up, to figure out what kind of works for you, right? With those lifts that you were making at that time, you've started to figure out a pretty decent base of what works for you. What was that base?
At that point in time, I like to use the visualization of like spiraling upward or downward versus, like a circling back. But I felt like over the course of my career, things had ended up coming back around to similar things that I had done at previous times. I never really was entirely removed from that initial group. And I was still heavily impacted by the way they organized stuff and did stuff. But over time, a lot of the things that evolved for me, I used a lot of speed work that used contrast. So I would do a lot like an Olympic lift, and then I would perform like a set of speed squats, and then maybe a throw or something like that afterwards. So sometimes I would do like a 1 or 2 or even 3 level contrast like that. I found that really beneficial raw too, because I didn't get beat up quite as much as if I was doing like a 10x2 or something like that in briefs.
Would that be jumps for your squat then?
So I would do, say I would do like a high pull. Maybe I would do like 3 high pulls or something like that. And then I would do like a double on a squat variation. And then I would do like a box jump or something like that. So kind of like a 3 movement series. Sometimes I would just do it like a 2 movement series, but that kind of contrast would allow me to get I felt like the same sort of bang for my buck, without getting quite as beat up, because I didn't have to absorb as much eccentric work without the briefs to help me absorb some of that eccentric. I still used bands and chains a lot. I used chains a lot more when I was raw, and bands a lot more when I was in gear. And the reasoning for that was the same with the that overspeed eccentric with the bands, I found it to be a little harder to recover from raw. Like I still used them,
Yeah.
but just like how often those rotated in versus other things. And when it came down to like the week to week things like that and the day to day things, those were the big structural changes that had sort of evolved with the speed work. And the heavy work was pretty similar to the way max effort work kind of always was. It was just what movements I used at the time would sometimes, change block to block or whatever. But I did use a lot more straight bar work during that period of time for my max effort days, for longer periods of time going into meets. And then outside of that, then it was just kind of.
How would you run that movement? Like how many weeks would you do the same movement?
The same bar going into a meet, I would usually do it like 6 to 8 weeks, but it wouldn't be the same stimulus every time. So sometimes it like would be against bands or it would be reverse bands or something like that. So on the raw training for the max effort days, I'd still win against bands sometimes. And then I used reverse bands a lot so that I could recover faster from it and train harder again sooner.
Was there any periodization set into that?
Yeah. So it was still set up on the same. I kept the 3-week waves. Over the years, I've kind of organized that where sometimes I'll go down to even like a 2-week wave. Sometimes I'll go up to like a 4-week rotation. But usually the 3-week waves have been pretty constant with it. During that period of time, I was focused more on, we were talking earlier about displaying the strength. That was a period of time when I was really kind of within what I felt like was a strike zone at that point. So I was trying to really display the strength well. Whereas in like more recent periods, so like going into like the 765 squat, like when I was prepping to get, that strong raw, I had a rotation where it was like a pretty close to competition movement. And that would be like kind of like an RPE 8 week. And then the next week after that, it would be a mechanical disadvantage movement. So it would be something that would focus on something that I really sucked at, and it would exacerbate how hard the movement was there. So for me at the time, it was front squats with the safety squat bar. And so I would really push that hard on the second week, and that would be like RPE 10. So it would be like, but like with perfect form, so it would be like all out. And then the third week would be something reverse band, something easier to recover from, but it would be very similar to that competition movement again, but allow a little bit of an overload. And then I would rotate back through that as the same as the sort of like how to pick which movement.
Yeah. Well, from what you outlined, it kind of sounds like your what do I want to say, your load, right? Your ability to recover from the movement, let's just say that, your recoverability from week 1 to week 2 to week 3 is dropping each week, where the first week was the hardest, right? Because the load's going to be higher, and it's a reverse band, but it's still the heaviest load. That next week being a front squat with the safety squat bar, which, tonnage-wise, is going to be like 60%, maybe even 50% of what that week 1 was, right? So you see where I'm going here?
So I actually got pretty strong on the safety squat bar front squats though. And so even though I say like mechanical advantage, like weak point, I was still handling pretty heavy weights on it. So I've hit 715 for a double on that.
Okay. So how did that
equate
to week 1?
It would be like, cause like I said, I was going RPE 10 then. And it's like the week before that would be
well,
like
I'm looking at the
so
workload.
So the workload, like that first week would roughly be like, we'll say I was going to hit like 715 on squat. The week before that would maybe be like a 3 or a 5 with like maybe 660 to 685. Okay. And then that next week would maybe be a double or a triple on that front squat, maybe even a single. And I'd maybe hit that 715. And then that next week would be reverse band with a straight bar. And maybe I hit like 915 or 930 that week or something like that.
Okay, so the workload's going up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the number of sets too, the number of sets would change too. So like that last week would just be like one top set. That middle week, so this is something that I found pattern-wise too, is that I've had a lot of success with the volume and the intensity going up on the second week of the wave, and then pulling back the volume on the third week, and the intensity keeps going up. So it ends up being like a linear pattern for the way that the volume Or sorry,
Now, when you say volume, are you speaking sets and reps, or are you talking
in terms
workload?
in terms of total reps, but also the tonnage should end up going pretty close to linear too.
Yes.
So
yes.
the sets and reps, like say, for example, I got like a 4x6, so I got like 24 reps, and then I got like a 5x5, so I got like 25 reps, and then I got like a 6x3, so I got like 18 reps. But I would go up in intensity kind of
Okay.
linearly that whole time. And so like with that, like example that I gave for those heavy movements, so that might be like 660 to 685 for 3 to 5, and I maybe do 2 top sets there. And then that next week we're at 715. I'm only going to hit like 1 top single, but I'm probably going to, or, you know, maybe I hit like a top double or triple even, but I'm going to do that with smaller jumps going up. So I end up sneaking in 2 or 3 sets there too, maybe even 3 or 4 that would end up above that same loading threshold that I was before. And then that last week, I'm only going to go up, and I'm probably going to try to save my reps too. I won't hit that third week for myself. I wouldn't really hit anything above singles once it's heavy.
Yeah.
So then the total reps would go down even, you know, because all the way from, if I was thinking back to that, probably from 5 plates up, it would be singles.
All right.
On that last week.
I'm interested in the patterns that kind of get laid out, because I've seen, because this is an interesting thing with the RPE, and I'm going to use an extreme example here, is you can take a lift that you're super strong at, say a high box squat, right? 850 pounds or whatever it is. And you run that for a week or 2 weeks, and you work up to an RPE of busting your nuts off, like 9.5. And then that next week, let's say it's a Zercher squat, which your RPE of 9.5 is still the same effort, the same output, the same strain, but the load might be 495.
Right.
So the load's way down, but the RPE has actually, that's what I like to kind of look at, is how people manage those variables.
I guess I should have been more clear too, that even though it was something that I felt like hit a weak point developmentally, I was pretty good at the weight front squat. So like, if it was, I like to use movements like that I can't actually go that heavy on, almost as like a deload week, if that makes sense. Like my spine didn't have to hold that much weight that week. I didn't have to feel 900 pounds on my back. But like a Zercher squat, like 600 pound Zercher squat that's the heaviest I've ever went to on that. Like that was pretty gnarly for the musculature. My glutes, hamstrings, everything, my low back was like, I felt like the muscles were able to train as hard as they could, but I didn't have to handle 900 pounds either.
Yeah, I've spoken to a couple people that best way to explain it is they're using a classic linear approach, starting at 60%, going to 90% throughout the whole 12-week program or whatever it's going to be. But they'll change the movements. So the load every now and again of that 80%, they're using the percentage of the movement that they're doing for that day. So it may be a 1 board first week, a 3 board week 2, a 2 board, a floor press, but they're taking their maxes of all those and then linearly going up the percentage. So they're linearly ramping up, their effort, RPE, whatever percentage, whatever you want to say it. But the load actually has this crazy variability, which is interesting to think about, right? Because then you got to question how much correspondence does each one of these lifts even have to the main lift, which brings up the next question.
I think pretty much like everything kind of ends up like undulating, right? Going up and down. And so it ends up kind of being like things overlap like that, and
unless you fuck it up,
right?
And then the undulation they're not corresponding,
right?
And then it's just this big fucking curve.
So the way that I like when I talk to even like new coaches and stuff with it, thinking about manipulating the different variables, I try to tell people to think of it like knobs, because too many people like think of it like we're gonna flip these switches and do these different things. So you're just trying to adjust the knobs where you need. When you change the intensity, when you change the reps, people, sometimes they'll switch to like, I'm just going to go light on this, or I'm going to go.
Well, I like this example because it's, I used to talk about, you have this equalizer, with just the performance in general, old school equalizer with all the different fucking dialects, kind of like what they use over there for the podcast type thing. And one of them's flexibility, one of them's mobility, one of them's maximum strength, one of them's explosive strength. And each one of you can't push everything to 10. It's going to sound like shit.
Yeah.
You can't put everything down. It's not going to do anything, but there's this perfect mix where everything has to fall in there. But over time, this fucking board has gotten so wide because now you got supplementation, you got sleep, you got all these other fucking variables that are on this board that everybody's trying to change with all these different things. But in any stereo system, there's still the fucking volume control, right? That's
the main thing.
The main thing. Like there's three main things, right? Those main things are load, volume, intensity. Those things are separate from all these other little fucking things over here. And people will try to put them all as the same thing. And they'll start pushing up all this other shit, which sleep's important. All these things are important.
Yeah.
Right. But not as important as these big fucking volume controls over here.
Right.
Where I see so many people that are so focused on all these fucking knobs. Like all this shit's optimal. Their sleep, their nutrition, their supplementation and all that. And they're not making any fucking progress because they're not turning the fucking volume up. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly.
It all matters, right? Because once you get the volume and all this right and it doesn't work, usually it's those things. But people are so fucking preoccupied with all those things that they're not playing with the main things to figure, basically they're not training hard enough or they're training way too hard.
You can't know that it's on if you don't check to see if it's plugged in. And
I mean, you take the fucking, this can be all fucked up and you can take the sleep thing up to fucking 9 hours a day and 3 fucking naps and you're still not going to make any gains because you don't train for shit.
Yeah. There was a presentation that a professor gave in college that I think of often because I have to have this conversation often with like other coaches and other lifters and stuff. That there was the 6 variables that you can essentially manipulate for training. You think about volume, intensity, frequency, movement selection, and you exercise order. They all matter. I think I just listed 5 there. I don't remember which 5 I listed. Anyways, but they all matter. But it's like what order? Like it's like the please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, the order of operations. Like you don't move to the next one until you've done the other one all the way. To an extent, like if you don't do enough of it for it to matter, it doesn't matter if you do it. If you don't, and then if you don't go hard enough on it and do enough of it, well, it doesn't really matter what you're doing either. So, volume and intensity are king. If you don't have those two, once you have those two, everything else opens up.
Dave Tate here from elitefts to talk to you about bands. We've been a supplier of bands for almost 2 decades now. So I've known my way around the band landscape. When I'm talking about bands, I'm talking about floss bands, long bands, short bands, bands you can use for resistance training, mobility training, body weight training, and flossing. One of our most popular bands, or actually our most popular bands, are the long bands. The long bands are typically used the most with squats, bench presses. Our floss bands are bands that you wrap around the joint to be able to help with mobility, circulation. And the short bands are designed for shorter range movements, bench press, deadlifts, and a lot of times people will use them with resistance machines to help accommodate the strength resistance curve. Head over to elitefts.com and look for bands in the toolbar or blowout menu. Yeah. With it, I wish everybody understood that, right? Because it's, sometimes they'll turn those things so far down because of all the other things, it's, which is where those other things kind of come into control with all that, where if, how can I explain that? Work capacity is a really good way to explain this, because we can develop work capacity far to a greater ability than what's required for a powerlifter. If we were to use powerlifting as an example, look at what CrossFitters do, right? You can build work capacity to the point that it's really not, it's lost the specificity for what you really need, right? And so you're doing just too much shit. On the other end of that is you can reduce that work capacity so low, which happens a lot of times. I actually call it deloading before a meet. People just accidentally deload in like the off season and think, oh shit, I got way stronger. I'm doing way too much. I need to just do this little bit. But what happens is then their work capacity is going to fall with that. And then when that matches, they're not making gains anymore. And then they now have to bring the work capacity back up to be able to have the recoverability mechanisms to be able to recover from the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
So at times that work capacity falls so much that instead of trying to bring that back up to help with the recovery, they look at all these other variables and say, I'm training too frequent.
Right.
You know, so now they're training once a month or whatever it's going to be, because all they really had to do was to slowly bring up that work capacity, which isn't done with all the heavy shit. You know, it's all the accessories and all this other kind of stuff. Or they'll try to bring in and realize that's not where it needs to be. I need to bring up my work capacity instead of scaling it like we would peaking for a meet slowly over time with the weight. They just throw in.
And then they're overtrained.
And it's like, well, that doesn't work.
Right.
Because you're a fucking idiot about it. You're not going to go out and run 20 miles if you never ran before.
Right. It was like you were talking about before. You can't push everything as high as it can be all the time. And so if you pull back on that conditioning a little bit, you're allowing yourself to be, a little bit more specified towards what you're pushing. Short term, you can go display a little bit more strength that way. If you, pull out some of the GPP stuff, doing, instead of walking, if you're normally walking half a mile with a sled 2 times a week or something like that, if you walk 0.1 miles a week 2 times with a sled that week before the meet, you're still moving plenty to be nice and loose and feel good, but you're not beat up. And, I think it comes down to like minimum requirements or like prerequisites to be able to do things, thinking about, you can't turn any of those characteristics that you're pushing for all the way down, because they're at some point, even if you've got what you need for the level that you're at right now to go to the next level, there may be a higher prerequisite for that. And, I think that's something that like bodybuilders or powerlifters or anybody in any sport really can think about when they start prepping themselves for their, whatever they're doing and getting really into that tunnel vision. Then, most powerlifters can benefit from doing quite a bit more assistant stuff and being in a little bit better shape so that they're not trashed by third attempt on deadlift, and most bodybuilders can end up with a whole lot harder physique if they lift a little bit heavier on stuff sometimes too, like some of those old school bodybuilders that lifted really heavy, they had that really grainy, dense look. And it's hard to get that, I feel like, without something that's recruiting those high threshold muscle fibers, whether it's either like heavy or explosive or something like that. And
it's a weird thing, because in all these camps, you're looking for, as you're growing into these sports, you kind of discover what your maximal effective dose or maximum dose is, because we all overdo shit. At least everybody I know has always got to the point where they're just overdoing shit because you love it. You're pushing so hard. Fuck it, your identity. It's all these other things kind of tied into one. And then, so you establish that. Then later on, you start looking for what the minimal effective dose is. Then you fall into this weird dilemma to where you think it's one or the other, right? It has to be, and you see this in just conversations that you have. It's in these two different worlds. They don't train fucking hard enough. They don't do shit. This back and forth, and not realizing that it's always in the middle.
Right.
It's how you can periodize between those two to be able to figure out where that optimal range is for where your conditioning is currently at.
Yeah.
Right. That's the thing that gets left out, is people will talk about periodization and phasic approaches and all this other stuff, but at no point in time are they bringing up, well, what is your current work capacity? Right? Fuck, you could have just been sick for a month and your work capacity fell through the ground. You got to bring that back. Post injury, You know, you can't lift the same amount of weight as you did beforehand. You have to build that back up to be able to get in there. And so there's all this gray area that falls into all that, and people just want to go here or here.
Right.
I'm high volume or low volume. Like,
Well, I think people from the different disciplines, those different camps too, they see that those types of things and they think like for the thing that doesn't directly apply to them, they aim for the minimum requirement to still be able to do the other thing. And then for the thing that they like, then they try to push it to the maximum. Whereas if you really just focus on using those as kind of like bumper guards, kind of aim down the middle, most people that are exceptional athletes in any sport, you know, whether it's NBA, NFL, powerlifting, anything, they do the fundamentals exceptionally well. And just doing that over and over and run, that gives you the ability to just run straight ahead. Now you've got that energy to put into execution instead of calculating what you can get away with, you know, on one side of it for, you know, what's the least I can do to satisfy my requirement for this.
Yes.
And then what's the most I can do and get away with it on this?
Well, the most is I believe anybody can train themselves to the capacity to where they can squat heavy. I would never do this, by the way, or never have anybody do this 3 times a week. But here's the caveat. It may take 3 years to build the work capacity to actually be able to do that. Right? Because but that's not what people do, is it?
No.
You know, they jump right into it. I'm like, wait a minute.
Right.
You know, most people can probably hit it hard, maybe once a week, maybe once every other week. Right.
Right.
You can't go from that to it's going to take so much time, you know, to build that work capacity and joint health and all the other things required to be able to do that. But I'm not going to sit here and say it can't be done, because we know people that can do that. But they were either introduced to the sport, they were conditioned to do that.
A lot of times the people that are really successful that way started with that frequency and built up. And so whatever they were doing was quite manageable each session and week to week.
Yes, and vice versa. If they were to go from that down to
one,
it's going to have to take this long period of time, right? Because that work capacity is going to have to adjust.
The dose per exposure versus the frequency of exposures. So, you know, like that's actually something I've thought about a lot in my rehab from my quads over this last 9.5 months too, was kind of spiraling. You know, I used that spiral up analogy earlier. So I would go between periods of time where I was increasing my ability to have a larger dose per exposure, and, you know, on whatever leg.
Well, doesn't it have to kind of start higher?
Yeah,
right?
yeah, kind of build it up.
That's
but then I would, but then I would kind of intensify it. So I would actually, the weekly total would end up being similar, but I had sort of built up my ability to have this much per exposure. And so then I would take that and I would spread it out a little bit again, and I would have a higher frequency period of time so that I would get more exposures to the movement and improve how I could use my body.
Now, how did you tear the quads?
Squatting. Yeah, it was just squatting. So yeah, it was, I could make lots of excuses for it. I was using knee wraps. I wasn't used to it. I was dehydrated. I was cold, whatever kind of shit. But it was a weight that I've done a bunch of times. 660. I did a single with it, and a lot of times I go up and I'll hit like a single with either the weight that I'm planning to do the reps with or slightly heavier. So I did my primer single, felt great, put it in the rack, waited about 5 minutes, got set up, did the next set. First one felt good, but it felt like a little bit of a wobble. But I thought, hell, I can do 10 reps with this probably. So I started to go down again, and the left one blew out about 2 inches out of the hole, and it shifted to the right side. And then, so yeah, just shit happens.
So how long till you got the surgery?
They actually kept me in the hospital the whole 5 days, 6 days till the surgery.
All right. Then did you have infections or anything afterwards that kind of impeded? So it was a good run.
It was a good run.
So what the rehab?
I did actually have a pop in the night after the first surgery, and they thought that it was something more serious. So there was too much swelling for them to do imaging. So they opened me back up to check and make sure everything was still attached.
Yeah.
And it was one of the sutures in the membrane of the, I guess around the patella, around something, had torn. And so it wasn't anything significant, but they went ahead and put it back and gave me some extra anchors since they were already in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they kept me for 19 days in the hospital. I can't say enough about how good they took care of me up there. It was, my wife actually went out for tackle football. She had always been a thrower and had never really done any sport that required a lot of change of direction or contact or anything like that. And she tore her Achilles about 6 weeks before. So she's in the video running the monolift, and then I blow my quads out and fall down, and then there's these freaking cats at the gym that we were maintaining a farm for my in-laws friends for the winter. Long story with that, but while we were house shopping, and so these cats are not our cats, and I'm on the floor, and these fucking cats are just crawling all over me while I'm laying there, can't use my legs, and like
food.
Yeah, and I was
like you die.
I'm trying to army crawl to the car so that she can take me to the hospital, and these cats are just crawling on me thinking I'm playing. But.
So before you left the hospital, were you walking on a walker?
Yeah, they had me walking with a walker. They had 2 immobilization braces, so I couldn't move either knee at all. And they actually wanted the first doctor. They were both very kind, but the first doctor was very reserved, and his is the one that the surgery popped. And so then the other guy that redid that, they had very differing opinions on how aggressive they wanted to be with rehab. One of them wanted me to be entirely immobilized, both legs, for 8 weeks, and then leave the left one immobilized except for during physical therapy for 12 weeks, which I didn't think was going to work out well. So about 4 weeks in, I started walking without the braces a little bit with the walker, using the walker to just reduce the load as much as I needed to with my arms.
Any other training going on during this time?
Yeah, so that was one big thing with work capacity, and just staying sane, being in the hospital, because I couldn't really get up out of the bed a whole lot either. So I wanted to make sure I stayed in pretty good shape. And I mean, hell, let's be realistic with it. 300-pound dude on bed rest after surgery too. I didn't want a blood clot or anything like that too. So I was doing for lack of a better term, almost like boxer type conditioning. So I was doing a lot of sit-ups. I just had a certain number felt like I was in a prison cell. So
yeah.
I had a certain number of sit-ups and pull-aparts that I did every hour. And so every hour on the hour, I just did a couple sets of those all day long until I built up to doing quite a few. Kept myself in decent shape doing that cardiovascularly. So
then what did the training look like once you were able to start actually working the legs?
When I started working the legs, initially it was just things like just leg extensions, just the weight of my leg, eventually holding a medicine ball between the legs. That actually still feels better to me than any leg extension machine that I've found. Right now, leg extensions are the only thing that still bother it and feel like they were cranking on it. I was actually talking to some people recently that were saying that they had pain in their knees for several years afterwards. But knock on wood, somewhere. I actually haven't really had a ton of pain. I feel like I've sort of handled this, treated it like I'm teaching a little kid's legs to work again, because it's essentially what I was doing, and I haven't had a whole lot of pain. I squeeze a medicine ball and do leg extensions like that, and if I'm bracing my adductors, it seems to keep everything turned on right, and my vastus lateralis kicks on a little more coordinated. Otherwise, it feels like it kind of takes over and wants to crank it out. And I did a lot of stiff leg deadlifts, just a lot of volume on that. Lots of hypertrophy stuff too. So, we were talking about earlier, you kind of have to categorically focus on certain things, certain times. So right now, getting really strong on certain things just wasn't really in the cards. But building up muscle tissue that I could make strong later.
Yeah.
So I've just had a really long hypertrophy block for a lot of things. And really focused on trying to make my feet as strong as I can. Little things that I know will give me a good foundation as I go through the rehab so that I can keep stacking on top of things well. So that's been pretty much the main focus, is just making my body move really well again.
Have you gotten back to squatting to this point?
Yeah, I'm back to full range of motion squats. I'm using a lot of front squats now too, just because I can train my core and back a lot harder with a front squat. And my legs are the limiting factor by a lot right now. So I typically rotate between safety squat bar squats, front squats with safety squat bar, Zercher squats, excuse me, hack squats with a barbell, and a rack. Those don't feel great to the floor yet. And I've went to 200 on front squats with a safety squat bar. So I think I'm pretty happy with that right now, 9.5 months out.
So you know more about coming back from injuries now because you've been doing this shit forever.
Yeah.
Right? And you've coached people forever.
Mm-hmm.
So you've coached people through injuries as well. So now you got to like kind of coach yourself through this. What are you not going to do that you want to do?
Oh man, a lot of stuff. Yesterday it was probably one of the hardest things I've ever done, to keep it a movement day when I was in here instead of just grabbing onto stuff and starting to lift. But moving forward, as far as like big structural things, it's just, I hate to say that it's as simple as just not letting yourself lose focus and do things that you want to do instead of you need to do. Like sometimes you just come in and you're like, I want to go heavy on this and this and this. And there's just a lot of those less exciting bases I have to make sure that I keep covering. So I do a lot of isometrics and stuff now, the basic stuff like that. But it's, moving forward with this to make sure stuff like this doesn't happen again. It's just making sure that my body gets back to being able to move properly. I probably wasn't super honest with myself when I was going into that last block of training about how some of the athletic movements felt, some of the jumps and some of the stuff like that. So
how so?
My contact time was a lot longer than it should have been. Like when I would land on a jump, it would feel like it just took a second to be able to go on the next one again. Just little things like that. So just making sure that my lower body athleticism is better, kind of like I did when I circled back, and on my upper body I sort of made some of the same mistakes with my lower body leading into this probably.
Yeah.
So it's always easier to tell people what to do than to do it sometimes.
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to say. If you were your own client now,
yeah,
what would you be telling yourself?
If I was my own client now, then the main thing that I would be pushing would be improving the load tolerance and improving how frequently I can expose myself to that stimulus again. So right now I'm still at about 10 days in between being able to perform a movement again and it be kind of ideal in terms of continuing to spiral upward. And so the main thing that I'm focusing on now is getting back to where I can squat pretty heavy, either weekly or twice a week or something like that. Pretty heavy relative to where I'm at now.
Do you want to compete again?
Yeah. I would still like to put a 900-pound squat on the platform raw. That's been something I decided I was going to do that before I was even in college. So I'll do that. I will say though that it has been one of those things that you have to come to terms with some things that you wanted to do maybe might not be in the cards. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that I'm writing those things off either. It's one of those things that I feel like you have to, for myself at least, I had to have the maturity to know that these are the things that I want to go back and accomplish to feel fulfilled, and these are the other things that I have to let the chips fall where they may.
Well, it forces you to look at this more long term.
Yeah.
Which goes back to what we were talking about originally.
Right. Which
is always easier said than done until you have an injury like that.
Yeah.
You have no choice. You're not going to be ready to do that in 12 months.
No. Yeah. Absolutely. No, that's right. That's it. That's probably realistically a 5-year thing.
Yes. So then when you look back, let's say it's a 5-year thing, what would be 900 in 5 years, 800 in 4,
5, yeah.
which you've already done,
Yeah.
right? So 4 years to get back to
where you were.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Then when it takes you down to where you are now, we're talking like 500, this year.
Yeah.
And it's like, holy shit, that's way more than manageable, until the other side of your brain clicks in and says, well, that's fucking going to be easy.
I'm going to, I don't want to make light of that, but it just feels normal, to be quite honest. Cause I've had a couple other relatively bad injuries. I actually, you were talking about earlier, like if you could take some time off of the back end of your career and put it at the front end. I was actually injured pretty early on too. I was 14 or 15. I tore my piriformis and my glute and erector on my right side. And they found that I had like a leg length difference. It was also at the time when it was kind of trendy to diagnose people with a leg.
Yeah.
So at any rate though, they gave me one of those orthotics. I used it for years. And then, some of the, I don't know if it just never got checked again. And at some point while I was growing, it evened out, but at some point I didn't need it. I don't know if that was some of the stuff people use to help people heal. It affected a growth plate that wasn't done yet or what, but I don't wear it anymore. But it did seem to set off a chain of events there, because I had that from an early age, so, it makes you do have to think long-term with it, but, I think, this is part of the process. And I think that sort of accepting it as part of the process is helpful too, because you don't spend the extra energy. I mean, not to say that there weren't days that, like, there were definitely days where I was like, why the hell am I doing this? Or like, what the hell am I, or do I want to do this?
And I think this is, injuries like this are a necessary part of the process, maybe, because so much is wrapped up in it, right? Because we all learn things in the gym that carry over to every aspect of our life, right? So the things that we do in the gym provide so much value in regards to how we feel significant, connected. That's where our growth comes from. It's where community comes from. It's where all these other things come from. And that is our identity.
Yeah.
And we think it's our identity, right? And when we get convinced that it's our identity, and something like this happens and you can't do it, then you get in this weird spot where you don't know who the fuck you are.
Yes.
You do, right? But you're not what you think you are, right? So it allows that time for you to figure out who you really are, without all this, so you can have, so you can respect yourself, you can love yourself, you can have an identity outside of all this, and know that you do have that identity. Then when you come back, you're coming back. We go through different phases. Like, younger, I was lifting because I wanted to prove everybody wrong, right? That was a different, after a main injury, you come back and you're doing it because you want to prove yourself wrong.
Yeah.
Because you don't believe in yourself. And like, this allows me to believe in myself. And then you get separated from that again. And each time you get separated and you come back, it has a different value. It's not serving the same needs that it did before.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people that don't have those breaks, that it's still serving the same needs that it was serving when you were a child. Right. So you don't really grow. You don't become a fucking man, because this is serving all those needs that need to be served internally, from yourself, instead of all these other variables. And when it's separated, each time you come, this is why a lot of top lifters will get to the point to where, if they're being honest, they don't know why they do it anymore. They don't enjoy it. They've lost touch with why they started doing it in the first place, right? Then they get separated, or a lot of times they'll just go to a local meet and see people lifting, breaking PRs with 200 pounds and shit, and see how excited they are.
Yes.
Right? Because you get to a point where you'll break a PR by 5 pounds and be fucking pissed that it was only 5 pounds, because you knew there was more. You get to this point where you're never satisfied, which is fucked up, right? Because when you were younger, you were satisfied with everything that you ever did. You take, it gets stripped away. Then when you come back, you're going to be satisfied as fuck when you squat your first 315 again.
Yes.
405. All those things are like all these victories
Yeah.
that, you know, a year and a half ago were fucking terrible days. Think about that.
Yeah.
You know, 405 on one day, you wouldn't be able to do it 'cause something fucking hurt. You're pissed off. You're trying to figure all this shit out. Same weight, different time period. And you're like, holy fuck, I'm on my way.
Right. Well, and you know, if I'm honest, if you asked me this question 6 months ago, I may have answered it a little bit differently because I was going through that. Like, who am I? Do I want to still, you know, do this? What do I want to do when you're getting off of a bedpan when you're in your 30s? It's like, shit, I don't know if this was a good idea or not. How far to push this. But like you said, then you get excited, you know, like you see how one of your athletes does and you realize that like, that's why you do it because that's how you
kind
feel.
of get stuck and you feel like you have to do it.
Right.
Then you get back to wanting to do it.
Exactly. And, you know, I've been more excited even on, you know, I wouldn't even necessarily say that it's fair for me to call myself like a powerlifter or say that I think of myself as just that because I don't chase a 3-lift total even in my head mentally. Like there's lifts that mean a lot to me that I want to mark off of lists. And those PRs are what mean the most to me, you know, at this point. And so I think that, yeah, reconceptualizing some of those things and being able to think like, okay, this is what feels cool. This is what I want to do. This is how I want to test the knowledge that I've kind of acquired about the thing that I really like and like make sure that I can make my body do what I want it to do. And yeah, you learn much more authentically who you are when you go through that, but you also learn that if you can come back from that, I mean, it sounds cliche, but like if you can do that, you can do other stuff too.
Mm-hmm.
Like it carries over outside of the weight room. If you can do that, you can do anything. If, you know, if everything that you thought you were is challenged and you have to kind of, you know, maybe reinvent it, maybe do something a little differently, maybe do something differently, but make it a part of it. But just being able to adapt however you have to adapt. I mean, adaptability is
life.
That's the that's the biggest thing with survival, right? And intelligence and everything else is being able to adapt.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
With the clients that you work with, because you've been doing this forever, right? Things shift over time,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as far as what you see not universally, but just demographically with like weak points and things that they need to focus on. It's 5 years ago, it was one thing. 5 years before that, it's always changing. What are the things that you're seeing with your clients, new ones coming in, that you're seeing with the new ones coming in now that they're just not grasping?
I think it depends on kind of what they've been exposed to a lot before. I think that like and it's very much so one side or the other depending on what they've exposed themselves to. Because I think out of the lots of things that we've talked about where there's like two polar ends of things, people really like to get dogmatic with stuff. And so they'll either be in the camp of they do a lot of squat, bench press, and deadlift and not a lot of assistant stuff. Maybe they don't do a lot of variations. Or there'll be somebody that's open-minded enough to do whatever variation you can come up with for them, but they kind of do it haphazardly and there's not a lot of systemization to it. And so I think that it's important to understand like kind of the underlying sides of both of those too. Is like most of the people that are coming in and they're just squat, bench press, deadlift, those people are very linear thinkers. Those people do very well with structured routine, just in a circle type of, you know, thinking, you know, just straight ahead. Whereas the other people are very open-minded, and so that gives you an infinite toolbox to pull from, but maybe they don't really run in the same direction all the time. They're kind of going around in circles.
Yeah, I've seen that to where there's, the way I would explain it, and this has kind of always been the case, there's lifters that I say they thrive more on certainty, where that linear thing and the frequency, knowing what they have to do all the time, is where they're comfortable and where they'll do the best. They suck at auto regulation. They suck at change. And then there's the lifters that need variety. And there's basically like a difference between a conjugate person and somebody that's not.
Yeah.
Right. You stick somebody that needs certainty on conjugate, they don't know what the fuck to do.
Right.
And it's almost a battle not worth fighting. It's like, you know what, this goes against everything that their belief systems are built on, where it's not going to work, and vice versa with that. And slowly, I suppose one can go from one to the other, but they fall into those weird camps like that. So it's not really a new thing. I think the new thing with that is it's easier for them to find tribes like them. Where
there's enough people now.
Well, yeah, there's enough
get an
people,
echo chamber,
and it's easier to connect with people because of social media and stuff like that. So they can reaffirm their position very easily. I mean, we all can.
Yeah.
We can come up with any stupid fucking thing and then find a group of people that to associate with to reaffirm that, which I don't think is the best course of action. I think you need to challenge your ideas and see different things, because the one thing with training, and I mean, it's been over 2 decades for you, right?
Yes.
You can look at all these different training philosophies, and so much of it's all the same.
It's all the same.
And everybody's trying to look, from what I see, everybody's trying to look and point out the nuance and the differences, and not pointing out the 80 or 90% that's all the same.
The patterns.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Then above the patterns, there's one big main pattern, which is the athlete's ability to be able to regulate based upon daily undulating periodization, whatever you want to call it. That's the big cloud that's above all of it.
Right. Yeah. You know, going back to those two camps, I think a lot of it kind of comes down to like how people, because it's how you're spending your emotional bandwidth and your mental bandwidth for this, and your logistical bandwidth too. So I think it comes down to like how people take risks for an investment almost. With like the SBD people, they want that's like putting your money in the 401k or your IRA, and you know where it's going. And then I think that what conjugate, as I think about it, should be is like opening that gate to say, hey, I'm going to invest in stuff that's a little bit more aggressive, but I'm going to do it in a really smart way, and I'm going to pick out what I need, and I'm going to pick the tool that I need for the thing, and I'm going to be honest about what I need with it. And then I think that what I see happen a lot of times is that those people are very willing to spend the money and take the risk, right? But it's more like going and buying a shit ton of lottery tickets. And, you know, sure, the, you know, lottery jackpot's $50 billion or whatever it is. And sure, you bought 500 tickets, but you also bought 500 lottery tickets. And so the chances of you actually winning, versus you could have taken that money from those 500 lottery tickets to like maybe you need more than 500 lottery tickets worth, but you could take that to like a real financial advisor, and you could do something with that, you know, that kind of strategization of it, like it versus just being haphazard, right?
I heard the analogy, I think it was just yesterday, I don't know where I heard it, this is not coming from me, but let's say you have an Apple phone, right? And you've had an Apple phone, and you've used an Apple phone basically since they've come out. And you add that up over a period of time. I'm just making numbers up right now. And you would have spent like $21,000, you know, on Apple phones over all these years. Now, instead of buying the Apple phone, if you just would have put the same amount of money into their stock when it first came out, it'd be worth like $365,000. You know, so I probably fucked that all up, but you get the point.
Yeah.
You know, it's kind of the same thing is, you know, where you're going to invest, you need to look and see what that ROI is on that. And some people are going to gamble, you know, and say, I want an ROI. I'll risk the $1 to make 100, but the smarter ones are going to risk the $1 to maybe make 4 or 5, right? Even if they risk $1 to make 4 or 5, that means that if they don't make a return on the first dollar and they do the same thing with the second dollar, they got $5 to be able to play with for that ROI, and then get back instead of that 100,
right,
to be able to throw out.
But whether you're whether you're throwing, but if you're not doing it that way, whether you're throwing it on lottery tickets or if you're just like being real safe, letting it sit in a money market, either way, you're like making, those people are, in my opinion, are like making a decision to,
well, what they're not
hold themselves
doing
back,
is,
right?
you know, in the investment example that I just gave there, what you're not doing is you're not losing money.
Yeah.
So instead of putting out $100, I'm only putting out $5.
Right.
You know, with that 1 to 5 ratio. Because if you lose $100, right, and to make that back, this is where people don't think.
Mm-hmm.
They think they just need the $100.
Mm-hmm.
That just gets you back to zero. You need 200 to be able to make it back.
Right.
You know, so if you're navigating through these programs, you're going to take a risk. How much of that drop
Right.
are you risking? Because if it's too big of a drop, you get fucked up, you blow both quads.
Right.
You need to get back to where you just were before you can get back to where you want to go. That's
Right.
fucking 2 years, a year and a half, just to get back to where we just said it was 5 years.
Yeah.
5 fucking years.
So that's a big buy-in.
That's a big buy-in.
And most people, you know, we both love powerlifting, and obviously it's worth that to us. But it's also true that a lot of people
Is it? Because, right, let's take this back. You felt those little warning signs with your squat, right? Looking back in hindsight, right? That one decision you made is 7 fucking years.
Yeah.
Right? Because you had to have the surgery, the rehab, and then to get back to where you were.
I sure wouldn't make the mistake again if I had the option, but I would still do, and I'm still going to get back. You know what I mean?
You see what I'm saying, though?
Yeah,
it puts a different
No, it
perspective
does.
on how to look at that, you know, and how you can explain that to somebody else that's kind of in that same position.
Right.
Granted, you didn't know you were making that bet at the time, right?
Right.
So different scenario.
But when we're looking at, like, you know, a lot of people are in powerlifting for fun too, you know, and like people,
well, it should be.
and it should be, it should be for fun, no matter how passionate you are with it. It should still be fun. You know, but you know, some people, it's like playing around a golf on the weekend mentally to them, you know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
And so, you know, when you think about that as a coach, because that's one of the one of the realities of coaching is that, you know, I'd mentioned that kid earlier that's going to squat 1,100 pounds drug free this year. That's not most clients. I mean, that's not most people in the world, even if you're picking out the best powerlifters, you know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, most of my clients don't want to show up to work fucked up on Monday morning for whatever they did at the meet on Saturday. So, you know, some of them, like, you know, think about it more like that, and it's like they're all in, but like that's not.
Well, it's not the majority.
It's not most people's.
I mean, it's obvious, right?
Right.
I mean, if you look at open powerlifting, there's a top 5% for a reason.
Yeah.
Not everybody can be the top 5%. It's just mathematics.
I guess if you ask things I see in a lot of people coming into it too, I think from different camps, there's these 2 different ideologies about some of that stuff too. Like I think some camps almost think that it's like cool and hardcore if they've had some shit happen. And then I think some other camps are like looking at them like, bro, this is like heavy golf for you. I don't know why you think that's cool. You know, so I think there's kind of those people looking at each other too. You
kind of live in both camps.
Yeah.
No matter who you are. Because if you're all into it and it's everything that you want, all your friends and family members are like, dude, what the fuck? Like, why are you still doing this? It doesn't pay anything. You know.
Well, we all know a dude at the gym that was willing to take more risks with their health than we were. And we all know a dude at the gym that wasn't willing to take as many health risks as we were. You know, so it's kind of the whole big fish, smaller fish thing. There's always
I think it's
somebody that's going to take it further, probably.
Yeah, I think that boils down to you have to really figure out what you're doing it for.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying what you're watching, make sure to take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Right, because some people are doing it to fill too many of their own needs that it shouldn't be filling, but you don't know that until you get a little bit older, because usually those are the ones who are taking the risk that we all know, even the ones that do take stupid risks are really fucking stupid. You know, and those are the ones.
I've been really fucking stupid a couple times.
Yeah, I know. But there's still others that you would look at, and even in the state you were in at that, and I was in at that time, there's still others you look at like, oh, fuck.
It was self-destructive. Like,
big time, big time. while you're always being self-destructive,
Right.
but there's always other levels, right?
Have you ever felt like you see somebody like that and it almost shows you a mirror of yourself and you're like, hey, that's a warning?
It's a warning and it's a reminder. And it's fucked up, right? Because part of me kind of wants to intervene, but the other part knows it's not possible.
I've always approached that like you have to, I don't know, when it's crossed a line where it's made me think of something with myself, like you said, you feel like you have to intervene. So I've always tried to say like bring it up like a question, like, hey, how do you feel about this type of thing or whatever? Like and you know, sometimes you get a good read on that, like, hey, this is not your place to say something to me about that. And you just kind of have to leave it there. And it's like, well, I hate that because that's going to really affect his health or something, you know? But yeah, sometimes though, the times when you say it to somebody and they're like, shit, you're right. You know, that's the times that maybe is worth pissing people off the other time.
Well, the interesting thing with that is when that happens, you weren't the first person to say it to them.
Oh, for sure.
You were probably the 500th time that they were told that. It just happened to hit that one time that you did.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a reason why you should always say something. Because even though you know it's not going to matter, it stacks. You know, and then over a period of time. Because the people that we're speaking about here are the tiny minority. They would be better if they dialed it down. They would lift more. They would recover better. All these things would be better.
Happier life.
Oh, fuck yeah. Oh, yeah. Because they're happier life, they're going to recover better. They're going to recover better. They're going to be able to display their strength better.
Yeah.
Right. But they're in this cycle where they don't believe that to be true because I have to be this way to get this result because this way is what's got me here.
When it's like earlier you were talking about sometimes your lifts skyrocket for a period of time and you think it was like what you were doing right here, but you've been laying the groundwork for that to occur for a long time. That's the same thing in life too.
Yeah. So how has your client base changed over the past, let's say, how has it changed prior to the pandemic? Because there was an explosion during the pandemic. So
prior to the pandemic, so I was actually already doing online coaching then. It had just sort of worked when I had moved from Iron Pit. Some of the guys that I was working with there wanted to keep working with me. And I actually at the time didn't want to work with anybody that wasn't a powerlifter online. I didn't think that was a good way to do it. But those guys kind of let me have a little proof of concept model. So I hate to say that it like worked out okay business wise, but like the pandemic really it sucked because I didn't get to see all the people that I really liked to train in person, but I already had the kind of infrastructure set up to handle those people well. I already had the experience to handle those people well if they wanted to keep going during that time. I also put out like an ebook. It was called Prison Training during that time too. So that was pretty popular. All the little body weight things, you know, were popular at the time. And from that, I didn't expect so many like law enforcement and like military guys to like grab the prison training program. So that it was like, I didn't think, but yeah, I noticed all these guys like with like, you know, like the blue line type thing on their, you know, profile picture or whatever, all of a sudden started following me and that their names were lining up with people that were ordering those. I was like, went pretty popular in that community. So, so after the pandemic, I've worked with a lot of law enforcement, and with some like, I say military, but a lot of them were people that actually work for like private military contracting companies that have a little more expendable income. So those people make up a lot of like my like normal, like general pop people, that aren't competing in any athletic event. And then I've got some power lifters. I have some people that do like the deco races and the endurance. So if you're familiar with that kind of, so that kind of
explain
stuff.
it to those who don't know.
So it's kind of like CrossFit, except for they don't go really heavy on stuff, I guess is the best way to say it. You would perform an exercise and then you run to the next station and perform an exercise. And so they have different ones with different distances between. So some of them are like 100-meter sprints in between. So it turns into more of like none of the lifts are heavy enough that any of them are really measuring strength. But I guess you would be really measuring your ability to produce power and to produce power in repeated bouts.
Yeah.
And some of those shorter ones. And then some of them go into more endurance based, where you're, running like a 5K by the end of it, or, stuff like that. But it's all like essentially like feels like a Metcon for CrossFit, if people know what a Metcon is that are listening, I'm sure. But it actually works out pretty well. Like a lot of that same training works out pretty well for the tactical athletes, because one of the biggest things, if you look at like law enforcement compared to military, compared to like firefighters, if you're looking at military, just being super explosive right out the gate is great, but being able to do that over and over and over again, and maybe you rest 20 to 60 seconds and then you're just as fast on that next 60 to 100 yard sprint, that's a little bit more important than it is to be able to run 5K nonstop pretty fast.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at like law enforcement, it's really important, you probably won't get into too many situations where you have to run and crouch and shoot, and then run and crouch and shoot, and then run and crouch and shoot over and over again, hopefully. And so it's probably more of having the general readiness to just take off after somebody and sprint and catch them immediately. So the DECA actually works really well for both of those types of things, especially for the military guys, though. It's very similar to that. So
what is that? How do you change your training to accommodate that? So what's a block simple?
So like a block for them, like we would have like a movement series. So
well, let me dial that back a little bit, because what changes here is you don't have a date of competition, right? If you're working with military tactical, right?
For military, not
yeah. So they're not doing the DECA, right? So then they have to have state of readiness all the time.
You just don't, like, the way I've treated it is that I don't really focus on a peak as much. That last little bit where you would pull back and super compensate and like have a day that you're really prepared to be the best, that just doesn't really come. Like your training still undulates to where you'll have a point where sometimes you're, probably the most physically prepared you'll be for a while. But you, like you said, you have to have a minimum state of readiness all the time. And so turning those knobs up and down, you can just never turn the knobs down far enough that you're not still ready to do those things. That's basically,
you do that by not turning it up so high.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, when I'm thinking about like somebody that's competing in DECA or High Rocks or something like that, that's actually got a competition date, we would have a series that's pretty similar to what they're going to do there. Maybe, the movements may change. There may be more or less, whatever. It doesn't have to be, it's not just competition practice over and over again and getting better at that.
Do they know the movements?
Yeah, they know the movements, and they're doing all the movements. They still get good at all the movements, and they still even have, sometimes they will have like almost a competition practice day where it's pretty much the same thing, and we see how fast it is the same thing, and we see how fast they can do it. But then usually we would be manipulating the volume and the intensity week to week on those waves by how far we have them sprint, by how many rounds we have them do it, how much rest time is in between. And so we can manipulate all that way, or even how many movements are in it. So maybe if they suck at a couple of the movements, maybe we don't do all 10 of the DECA movements. Maybe we have a circuit of the 4 that they suck at, 3 that they suck at. And then, that would be peaking towards whenever they're going to display it. We would just never, like I said, really go that far into the peaking. It would just circle back through developmental phases more and more for those guys.
You had a topic down here, globalized core training for strength athletes.
So the term globalized core training, I'm not sure if anybody else used it before, but Jason Bullia from UNC, that was one of my mentors, he had that coin termed. He had taught a seminar on it somewhere, but it's essentially just the concept of integrating everything to connect on a core movement. So if we think about how we use our body in any sport, powerlifting included, we're not just when we do a plank, we're not just locking down here. It's thinking about everything connecting. And so just building movements out from that. So it's not necessarily movements that are like new movements. It's just conceptualizing it as putting it all together as a unit that works together.
So more thinking about bracing with everything that you do.
Yeah, more thinking about bracing with everything that you do. Some of the extra content that we did this morning, I utilized some carry series, stuff like that, where the whole body's working together. I'm still warming up my core for what's to come, but I'm not just doing, just a side plank. Or even if I was doing a side plank, just kind of acknowledging like, okay, well, I'm tying in the lateral hip musculature too. And so how else am I going to build this other stuff up so that everything connects together? So,
well, I think there's a lot of low hanging fruit there where,
yeah.
One of the things that we harp on a lot when we have the clinics that we'll do is, you have rooting, which and bracing, they kind of go together, right? I mean, if you're not rooted, you can't brace very well. But people will understand it with a squat, deadlift, maybe overhead press, but they don't realize they can still do that when they're doing push downs or any other movement, right? And those are all opportunities to reinforce that skill. Because it's a skill and a strength, and a strength that I don't know if there's any top end to, that can just keep building and building and building. But one of my biggest frustrations with that is most lifters won't even think about it until they're warmed up past 40%.
And that's why one of the big things with the way I like to apply it is at the beginning. It has to be performed at the beginning, just like a dynamic warm-up, so that you can get the most out of the other movements. In my opinion, you've got that locked in. You can feel what you need to feel. So whenever I have people perform a side plank or perform a plank or anything like that, I want it to feel like whenever you unrack the bar and you brace and you can feel that rooting, you can feel pressure go through your feet when you lock in on a squat, right? So you feel the whole chain connect. That's what you want on any of the core movements, whatever it is, maybe not through your feet, but you feel everything connect. And you're able to get more out of the training too. So it's not just that you feel better and you can perform better on it because you did that before, but you can get more out of it too.
Oh yeah. I use the analogy. It's the transfer of force is greater. I mean, you can take the middle of the body out, put a marshmallow in.
Yeah.
Right. And all that force in the legs just gets lost.
Yep.
Or you can take it out, put a rock, and then all the transfer force goes where you want it.
Something has to absorb the force, either the structure or the muscle. And so when it comes to like spine health, keeping the spine safe, stuff like that, I always use that analogy for people. I had herniated discs in 2012 that were serious enough they called spinal stenosis on my left leg. So that was actually a confounding variable for this rehab too. I had to make sure I didn't let that flare up or anything. But that was one of the big things coming out of that, was just to get my core strong enough that it could support the load without putting pressure there and allow that to heal up and be okay. So yeah, the globalized core movements, they can be just like those normal movements and thinking about integrating them, but they can also be things like I would do 30-second pause squats. I would do, even like heavy overhead squats, stuff like that, SOTS presses, single arm kettlebell presses.
So basically anything that forces you into that.
Yeah. Anything that makes the whole body, like I said, I don't really think that, I think that the big value of calling it globalized core training like that is that it just makes people think of it that way. Because a lot of times when people say core or trunk or, there's so many buzzwords and stuff, people get so locked into that and they're like, well, I did my core. I can feel my abs burn or whatever, but it's feeling the whole thing connect, because in powerlifting or Olympic lifting or strongman, it's all about using the whole body as a coordinated unit. And even a bench press, the whole body is utilized in a bench press, so if you have a weak point, you don't have that force transfer. So,
were there any other topics you wanted to go over I didn't bring up?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head. I think we covered a lot.
Yeah. Well, how can people find you? What's the best way?
Josh Miller Strength Coach on Instagram is the best place to keep up with new stuff coming out. And then my website is ntbfwtrainingsystems.org.
And what do you offer through the website?
Through the website, I offer coaching. I offer consultations. I also offer coach-to-coach consultations, which is I'm a nerd, so I've been really enjoying that the last year or so. And then there's also plenty of ebooks and programs that people can buy and download on there as well. So,
all right, we'll put all the links in the description. Okay. Any final thoughts you have?
Yeah, there's actually one more thing I would tell people to look at. I think one of the biggest things that people overlook is what they do outside of the gym. Mm-hmm. And so there's a practical application workbook that I've put on there, and it's meant to boil everything down. It's 25 pages, so it's comprehensive, but it's also concise on the other 22 hours of the day. So it's called the other 22, and it covers everything from training to sleep, nutrition, all the other stuff that you need to do outside of the gym to get the most out of your programming. And that's just an ebook that I put up because I found a lot of the people that were coming. A big part of this is for me to get satisfaction out of it is for people to actually be successful with it. So for years, I refused to put any ebooks or programs up because I hated the idea of people just grabbing it and going and not doing it right and then being like, this guy's program didn't work.
Yeah.
And so after years, I finally caved and started putting a couple up, but I put that ebook up as well because I wanted people to be able to get everything they could out of it.
So is there a section in there that says if you're the meathead powerlifter and you're all in with everything, the only sexual position you should do is on bottom?
I do not have a mission. No, I do not. I do not have that specific category.
You should, because you'll fuck yourself up doing all the other stuff.
That's true.
It'll if you're on top, your triceps are going to be worn out for your bench.
I'm going to tell you.
Fuck your hips up doggy style.
To be honest, the last 9.5 months, I've been restricted. The last 9.5 months, I can't even be on the bottom,
Yeah.
Can't even be that aggressive there. I'm restricted to doggy style beside the bed.
Oh, God. Okay.
I mean, just standing only.
Yeah, that's a good place to end this on. All right, we're done. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All content you see on this channel and at elitefts.com is created by, take a guess, Elite FTS. If you want to help support the content, head over to elitefts.com and pick up literally anything that you need to be able to get more jacked and strong.